Welcome back, America. It's time to dive right into our conversation. It was hard to believe it's just a few short months ago when North Dakota's governor jumped into the GOP presidential race. And then, very quickly, Americans got to know him, his substance, and his policies. And today, he is here joining us in the studio. Governor Doug Burgum, welcome. Good to have you here, sir.
John, great to be with you, and great to be with you, Rebecca.
Yeah, great honor to have you here, sir. We're going to start the first question with Rebecca. Go ahead, Rebecca.
Thank you so much, Governor. We appreciate you joining us today. Millions of Americans were shocked and horrified by Hamas's brutal attacks on Israel, including the barbaric killing of at least 40 babies. Now, President Biden has been slow to respond. In fact, the administration's initial response was to urge both sides to refrain from violence and retaliatory attacks. If you are the commander-in-chief right now, what action would you take to confront radical Islamic terrorism, including Iran?
Well, first of all, like all Americans, our hearts and prayers go out to the people of Israel. This is horrific. It's unthinkable. Rebecca, you talked about it. I mean, the idea that any of us a week ago thought that we'd be hearing reports of, beheadings of babies, innocent slaughter of people in their homes. This is absolutely Israel's 9/11, only at a multiple much higher than what we experienced here. And I think we all understand how that was etched into America's psyche. So this is a wound that is going to be there forever. But in terms of your question, since we announced our campaign on June 7th, we said we're running on three things: economy, energy, and national security. And the key in national security, and we said, what are the issues? And one of the issues is you can't just go after if I can use a business term, you can't go after the subsidiary companies like Hamas and Hezbollah if the parent company, the regime that's running Iran, the one that's actually financing all of this terror around the world's largest sponsor of state terrorism, that we continue to, with the Biden administration, to try to make friends with them. I mean, the whole effort to try to revive what was the failed Obama-Iran nuclear deal is the Biden administration has been doing that. It's been hidden in different ways, but the $10 billion that got released earlier this summer that didn't even make the headlines in June, the $6 billion more recently on this so-called hostage deal. I mean, what person in America would say, I'm going to trade 5 of my team for 5 of your team, but I'll also throw in $6 billion. I mean, that makes no sense to anybody. And part of it's because I really believe it's part of a secret revival of the Iran nuclear deal, which in 2015 there was a law that was passed that said that we couldn't do a nuclear deal with Iran unless Congress approved it. So the Biden administration, like they do in a lot of other things, trying to bypass the law to try to get this deal done. And now it just comes home to roost that this is happening. But the worst on top of all of this, which nobody is reporting and no one's talking about, is the fact that if you look at the oil exports coming out of Iran in the last few months, they've skyrocketed. Where they're headed, they're heading to China. China's rebuilding their strategic petroleum reserve with Iranian oil, and then billions, and it's estimated this could be $25 billion of revenue coming to Iran from the sale of oil and gas. And so if we have sanctions, they should be enforced. If we have the $6 billion, it should be refrozen. It should have been never unfrozen in the first place, because, I mean, rule number 1 is don't negotiate with terrorists. And that's effectively what Joe Biden has been doing since he's been in office. And so it comes home to roost now. And it's whether it's our failure to have deterrence in Ukraine, which enabled Putin to actually do his invasion. He would have never invaded Ukraine if we hadn't already had all of Western Europe dependent on his energy. So we've got an administration that's bent on appeasement, whether it's the withdrawal from Afghanistan, whether it's the failure of us to have deterrence in place to prevent Putin from going into Ukraine, and then now again negotiating and actually giving billions of dollars to an enemy that attacks us every day from a cyber standpoint. That's supplying. Iran supplies weapons to Russia to attack the people and the free people of Ukraine. And so it's like, why are we helping the people that are hurting us? And so this makes no sense to me. So your question is as president, obviously the thing I do is I would bring the fight to the parent company, and I would make sure that if you're a Hamas or a Hezbollah agent anywhere in the world, these are global terrorist organizations, that there be no safe harbor for you anywhere, because we have to eliminate the ability for these organizations to extract terror against our allies. America is more prosperous and safe when our allies are more prosperous and safe, and an attack on Israel is effectively an attack on the United States.
Thank you.
Sir, I want to ask a little bit about Iran. We've been dealing with this cycle of terrorism for 40, 50 years. In the Burgum administration, is regime change an ultimate goal in Iran for you?
Well, it's certainly something that if you talk to people, I mean, I went to college with folks that were from Iran, and they were here in going to graduate school when the Iranian Revolution happened, and they went from prosperous families with ties with the U.S. to whatever, to essentially not knowing if they could pay their rent the next month.
Right.
I mean, and then their siblings and parents, whatever, trapped behind the regime that's still in power now, and we see what the oppression that they do to women, and so it's a tragedy when we think about the human rights violations that are going on in that country with the regime who's really got a goal, which is death to America and death to Israel, and so that is certainly a challenge. And I think that again right now, when the idea that somehow we're giving them the billions they need to attack us and our allies, yeah, that has to stop.
Yeah. The recent Hamas attack on Israel's border has caused so many Americans even greater concern about the security risks of our own porous border. 200,000 illegal migrants crossed last month alone. The Biden administration has begun installing more miles of the Trump border wall. As president, what would you do to ensure that terrorists don't enter our country through the southern border? And also, what measures would you take to ensure that terrorists have not already entered?
Well, Rebecca, I'm afraid on your last question is that we're too late. I mean, it's just unbelievable what's happened under the Biden administration. I've been down to the border more times than the president has. We've had troops down there, multiple deployments. When I was there in August, we had two groups that were deployed. One that was supporting Texas and trying to protect the border. The other was a group of our National Guard airmen that were flying helicopter missions and leading that mission from San Diego to the Gulf Coast, specifically trying to stop these transnational criminal organizations. And think of it, in the time that Joe Biden has been in office, it's the equivalent, 6.5 million people that have come across and been given asylum papers. Those are the ones we're processing. That's every man, woman, and child in the state of Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, Rhode Island, Joe Biden's home state of Delaware, and then you have to throw in Montana, everybody in Montana to get to 6.5. And I'm down there getting the briefing from the Border Patrol, and there's a number on there on the wall. And I said, what's that? Well, that's the known gotaways. Known gotaways is people that they see on camera, but we don't have papers on. That's another 1.5 million. In the sector that we were in Texas, there was people that had come in from over 100 countries. It's not just Latin America, 100 countries. And guess what? People on the terrorist watch list, people from Syria, people from Iran, people from China. I mean, all of the people that are our known enemies are entering our country, and they're actually using the Biden administration policies like family separation. Border Patrol said people come in and they may be a terrorist, known terrorist, affiliated with a terrorist, but they've got some youth with them that they claim as a family member, and then we can't separate them because we're pursuing a policy that's not about national security. It's about an idealistic goal that is not making the nation more safe, because you know what else is coming across the border? Fentanyl. Mm-hmm. And we're taking mass casualties. We have an invasion of people, and we're taking mass casualties. The number now, staggering number of overdose deaths in our country since Joe Biden took office is now approaching 270,000 deaths since he took office. That's 300 a day. That's equivalent of 5 Vietnams worth of casualties. 70% of those are fentanyl overdoses. And if we lost an airplane today with 300 people, and then we lost another one tomorrow of Americans that went down, and then the next day, by the time we got 4 days out, everyone would be calling your kids and your grandkids and your friends, don't get on an airplane. We've got to have a solution to this. But when we lose them one at a time, a son, a daughter, a niece, a nephew, a mom, or a dad to a fentanyl overdose, it's just silently happening. This tragedy is happening every single day, and the Biden administration is really doing nothing about it. And so now, only belatedly, because we had some liberal mayors like in New York City saying we cannot take millions of more migrants, we can't afford this, it's bankrupting our cities, does Joe Biden come up and say, oh, well, I guess we have to spend the money to do this. And then meanwhile, we're underfunding our Border Patrol, completely underfunding our Border Patrol, and then who would go into the Border Patrol? The federal government is effectively defunding the Border Patrol the way some of our liberal cities are defunding the police, because why would you go into a field of law enforcement if you don't get to do it? When we were down there, the only troops on the border were our troops from my home state. Because do you know where the Border Patrol were? They were back at a soft-sided facility, aka a tent, burning through $20 million a month, processing these hundreds of thousands of people that you're talking about. They're doing paperwork, not computer work. They're doing paperwork. They didn't go into law enforcement. So if you say, what would you do to control the border? Because we cannot have national security without border security. I will be down there in the first 2 weeks. Biden didn't get down there for the first 2 years. And we will actually empower the Border Patrol to do their job, because if they've secured the border before, they could secure it again if they have the money, the technology, and the staffing to do it. But guess what? The cartels on the other side have so much money. They've got drones. They're making tens of millions of dollars a week on human trafficking. The spot where I was at, where people were literally walking across the river, they don't just, we picked a shallow spot. No, the cartel says, we control this spot. You can't cross here. Give me all the money you have left in your pocket. Some of these people made it to the border after a long journey. 7.5 million people have fled Venezuela, and then they get there and then they get extorted for take $1,000 out of their pocket to walk the last 150 yards. Why? Because they know that when they get to our side, then the Joe Biden administration is going to give them a bus ticket and basically some promise that they've been sold that's going to happen on our side of the river. So the thing is the biggest unreported crisis going on in our country, and now with these other global affairs, it'll get buried again, but every single day this is a humanitarian crisis, it's a national security crisis, it's an economic crisis. It's unbelievable to me that there's not coverage on this crisis every single day.
Yeah, there needs to be. Sir, I want to talk about an issue that almost never gets discussed in the national media. Rural America has so many challenges ahead of it right now. You have foreigners buying up farmland. You have healthcare access that's really spread out very thin in rural areas. You've got the price of diesel making everything from the pickup truck to the tractor a lot more expensive. Give us your assessment of what's going on in rural America and what policies you would do to address their needs.
Well, I can tell you one place where rural America is doing great, and that's in my home state. We've got the highest GDP of any Republican-led state in the nation. We have got the highest workforce participation of any state in the nation, across 70%. We've got among the lowest unemployment. Our population is growing. It's getting younger. People are, building families. Our cities are thriving. So our education scores are among the highest SAT median scores in the nation. So we've got a lot going on, but that's not to say we don't have challenges. But having grown up in a small town and leading a state and having, built a global company with kids from small towns, I really understand it. And I know from being on the ground in Iowa and New Hampshire, everything you're saying, John, is absolutely true. I mean, again, you mentioned just diesel. I mean, diesel is part of what rural America runs on. And whether you're a lobsterman in New Hampshire or a farmer in Iowa, they'd all like to be getting 20% off on their diesel tomorrow. But no, I mean, our sanctions turned Russia into China's discount gas station. So China's getting, discounted oil and gas, but not Americans. But it's a challenge. One of the things is a challenge is healthcare and healthcare services in rural areas. But we've come up with innovative ways, even with the disease of addiction. There weren't enough addiction counselors. We created a program in our state where now we have over 1,000 peer support specialists. They get paid more if the clients they work with get a place to live, get a driver's license, and get a job. So we've got incentives. Okay. And when I say lived experience, they may actually have come out of the criminal justice system with a felony because they ended up as a felon because of a nonviolent drug charge. But in North Dakota, we understand that addiction's a brain disease, and that we have to address it like a healthcare problem, and that we've got people helping people. So there's a lot of ways where we've lowered the cost, improved the services, created jobs for folks, and so we've got a lot to say. We've got a Main Street initiative in our state too, where we're focusing on smart infrastructure, vibrant downtowns, workforce infrastructure, and even in rural areas, one of the biggest challenges is childcare. And we came up with innovative programs to support women entrepreneurs to make sure that those people that want to work have access to affordable, high quality, and and really high quality and accessible and safe childcare for their families. And so when we do that, that's one of the ways that we've been able to achieve the workforce challenge, which our whole nation is a challenge, but we got college educated women that want to work. Let's make sure that they've got the infrastructure to be able to do that for them and their families.
Innovation at work. That's
Yes.
what's going on now.
Excellent. Governor, hundreds of the AMAC members submitted questions for this interview. AMAC is the conservatives' alternative to AARP. We have a great question from Nikki Coletti in Glendale, Arizona, and she asks you, how would you rectify the national debt and would you bring oil independence back to the United States?
Well, great question, Nikki. And yeah, the debt it's such a big number that it's hard for people to get their head around when we throw out numbers like $33.5 trillion. But I was looking the other day, if I was going to pay each of you $1 every second, and I just started picking off $1 every second, it would take me almost 32,000 years to hand you $1 trillion.
That puts it in perspective.
I mean, it's like even that is like, wow. I mean, 32,000 years is hard to get your head around. I mean, this is like almost like geologic time, but these are just massive numbers. But we have a big economy, and one of the ways that we can get that debt taken care of is we've got to get our economy sprinting instead of crawling. It's crawling right now, and it needs to be sprinting. So high growth. We can reduce federal spending for sure. In North Dakota, when I became governor, we cut 27% out of the general fund. Not slowed growth, not grew a little less. No, we actually took a number and made it lower, 27% lower on spending, and never, every train still left on time. And how did we do that? Well, part of it's because my background, I mean, I'm not a politician. I mean, I was a business leader and had 30 plus years of experience in the tech business. I mean, on that last debate, I was the only one on stage that has been making payroll since my mid-20s. I'm the only one that's created thousands and thousands of high-paying jobs. And when you do that, and you're in the software business where there's no tariffs and there's not subsidies. I mean, the part of the software business I was in, it was just like raw competition. You had to be better, faster, and cheaper the next day. Bringing that mentality to government, you can take out all kinds of cost out of government. Every single job in every single agency at the state and federal level, there's 10 to 20% of what those well-meaning team members are asked to do that adds no value to any citizen, and they know it. So it becomes mind-numbing, soul-sucking work, to do this. So back on Nikki's question, I mean, one of the things that is crazy, we've got this big deficit right now, and America has 240 million acres of federal land. Theodore Roosevelt, the father of modern conservation, put that land away and specifically said for the benefit and the use of the American people. That is on our balance sheet. The largest landowner in America is actually America. The largest mineral owner in America, it's not an oil company, it's America. And whether that's rare earth minerals, whether it's uranium for nuclear, whether it's oil and gas, the largest is the United States. And the Biden administration wants to shut it down and say that asset is off limits. We're going to buy it all from our enemies. And guess what? They don't produce it as cleanly as we do. If you cared about the environment, you would want to have every ounce of liquid fuels. You'd want to have every electron of electricity. You'd want everything produced here in America because we produce it cleaner, safer, and better than anyone else. When we try to shut down the U.S. energy industry, it does not reduce demand. It just displaces supply. It takes American supply and gives it to some foreign entity who is not operating with the same goals. China is the largest polluter in the world. United States is taking more CO2 out of the air than any country on the planet. Why would we shift our future towards all EVs? Why would we subsidize 500,000 charging stations and subsidize EV cars and then buy our batteries from China, who controls 85% of the rare earth minerals, and then they're the ones that are now running their economy on coal. They're opening up a coal plant every week. So for Nikki's question, yes, energy, it's not just energy independence, it's energy dominance. Because with energy dominance, then we're supplying ourselves and all of our allies. That helps push back on these dictators. It stabilizes the world. It lowers inflation. It brings manufacturing jobs back. It does all of that. And again, I mean, just another example of the craziness where the Biden administration, at the time of the Russian invasion, we were importing 400,000 barrels of oil a day into New England of dirty Russian heating oil. Why were we doing that? Because you can't, under the Biden administration in the state of New York, you can't get a permit for a pipeline from natural gas from Pennsylvania up into New England. New Hampshire, people in New Hampshire, 41% are still heating their homes with heating oil. just right away, if you care about the environment, let's switch that over to clean natural gas. Let's just do that. But we can't get it done because the people that want to save the environment block the pipeline. And when they block the pipeline, then we start buying from Russia. I mean, it's just, we need to have someone in the White House who understands the economy, understands system economics, and understands how we can solve this. Because Nikki's question is, we've got to balance the budget, and we can do that without raising taxes. We do that by cutting spending. We don't have a revenue problem. We've got a spending problem. And on the revenue side, developing our energy, I mean, her question was perfect. Develop the energy, and it drives revenue in for the American people. It's our balance sheet. It doesn't belong to a bureaucrat in the Biden administration who's unelected. It belongs to the American people. Let's use it to support ourselves, support freedom, and support our allies.
Sir, I know you've done a lot of thinking. When I went out to the Midwest in the summer, when you talk about Washington, it might as well be a foreign country to most people. They feel like, oh, that's the weirdest place in the world, and yet it's our capital. What would you do to restore trust in government while shrinking it? And do block grants play a big role in your idea of shrinking bureaucracy and getting government closer to people?
Absolutely, and John, I'm also going to go back because you mentioned in your multiple question thing about rural America and selling. In North Dakota, a corporation can't own farmland. Wow. You and I couldn't own farmland. You and I couldn't say we're going to start a business and do that. We can do that. Well, and that's been in place for over 100 years. We strengthened that this year to make sure everybody absolutely understood. I mean, so there's no foreign country, there's no foreign corporations, there's no U.S. corporations that own farmland, and we protect that asset for America. We have to have food security as part of our national, our national security.
Yeah, that's important.
So back to this question.
Yeah, block grants and shrinking government.
Yes, well, absolutely. I mean, I'm a 10th Amendment guy. 10th Amendment, 28 words. These are the powers that are delegated to the federal government. And people forget that because it doesn't say actually in there who delegated it to the federal government. Well, the states delegated it to the federal government because the original states created the federal government, and they created the federal government with limited powers. And then it goes on to say, and those that are not specifically delegated to the federal government, are reserved to the states or to the people. Importantly, both of those things, because the federal government not only is in the lane of the states, and I have a front row seat as a governor, where we're fighting right now on 20 different fronts on rulemaking. These aren't laws coming out of Congress. These are unelected bureaucrats in the Biden administration that are racing the clock to try to drive all this stuff through. And when they say it's a rule coming out, that rule might be 800 pages long, and it's 1,000 rules. It's not one rule, but we're releasing the new rule. And it's a euphemism to make you think it's like a simple thing. And so we've got every agency in our state working together. We're suing the federal government. We're the tip of the spear. We've won on the waters of the USA. We won on blocking them. This is the first administration since Harry Truman that hasn't held the legally required quarterly lease sales on Bureau of Land Management land for oil and gas minerals. When they're blocking that, they're actually driving inflation because they're shutting down U.S. production, they're displacing it to someplace else. So we're fighting and winning on all these things in North Dakota, but the block grant is, Department of Education, I agree with Ronald Reagan on a lot of things. He was the first president to say, let's get rid of the Department of Education. That was when he was running in 1980. Let's get this thing done. That's not a charter in the federal government for them to be running education. Education is state and local. And we could drive that money, but in North Dakota, half of our own state Department of Education, you know what they do? It's people that are sorting their way through all these federal grants because they tie all these ideological rules to the money that's coming out. Strip all that away. States get to decide that. If you want it, you either don't send the money, or if you do, just send it as a block grant. And then actually get the federal government, Department of Energy based in DC, anybody producing energy here? I don't think so. Maybe that should be relocated to Texas. How about Department of Agriculture? Maybe that could go to Iowa. It's like the idea that somehow it needs to be here. And I do give credit. Ryan Zinke, when he was Department of Energy, he did get part. There's almost zero federal land in the eastern part of the state, and he got a portion of the Bureau of Land Management relocated to western Colorado, so the people that work there might actually understand what it's like to be on the land or from the land, or get on federal land, because it's just, and of course the buildings here, most of them are empty because people are still working remote. But it's like, I guess we're proving that they don't have to be in DC if they can work from home. So let's get them back out closer to our country. If you were a company, you would not consolidate. You wouldn't have all your team members working at corporate headquarters, or you'd get them out to where your customers are. I mean, that makes sense. So part of this is return the power to the states, return the power to the people, shrink the size of the federal government, take out that waste that's in every single job and every single agency. You could get rid of 20% of the federal employees and not miss a beat just by redesigning the work, because that's what industry has to do.
Right. Yeah.
Excellent. I do want to stay on the economy just a moment here. Despite President Biden's claim that his policies are restoring the American dream, a recent Pew Research poll revealed that 6 in 10 Americans believe that life is worse for them today than it was 50 years ago. What would you do to restore economic optimism? I think this is an important question.
Well, absolutely it is, and we have to have leadership that can paint a vision of how the American dream is still alive and how people, we could be entering a golden age right now of technological advancement. And I know that with with the folks that you work in your amazing organization that are, older in life or more years under the belt, more wisdom. I mean, one of the things that's really remarkable right now is all the advances that are coming in healthcare. I mean, we're going to have breakthroughs in the next 5 or 10 years where we could actually eliminate entire disease classes. I mean, the opportunity for America to finally achieve breakthroughs because of what's happening in technology and AI is really, really remarkable. So that's exciting. But of course, we don't talk about that because we end up talking about all the issues. In our campaign, we know that if we do the executive branch right, I've seen it in North Dakota, if you do it right, you can improve every American life. Every age, everybody can improve. And then we also say, what do we do in North Dakota? We focus on bringing out what we call the best of America, which is, where are the examples of cities that are safe and where education is doing well and where neighbors are helping neighbors and it doesn't involve federal dollars and federal grant dollars. That's happening every day in our country, but nobody talks about it. Part of the bully pulpit is focusing back on what's working in America, not just the things that aren't working, because we have a ton of things that are absolutely, totally working fantastically in our country.
Thank you.
Sir, we have another question from an AMAC member. This one sent by video. Scott Coster of Wisconsin asked a question. Let's listen.
Moving forward, how does conservatism, such as limited government, individualism, traditionalism, and the preservation of traditional institutions, customs, and values fit into the Republican Party? Thank you.
That's a good question, Governor.
Well, it's a fantastic question, and it's great that you've got be able to bring viewers right in with this.
That's the benefit of the AMAC partnership.
Way to go, AMAC. Well, I just want to say to the questions asked is this is the core. I mean, this is what our country's built on. Our country was built on a set of aspirational ideals. And we do have some detractors in our country that feel like that they should be apologizing for our country when we've set aspirations higher than any country in the history of the planet. We have lifted more people around the world. American capital markets, American free markets, American principles, and American technology have lifted 1 billion people out of abject poverty in the last 25 years. That's never happened in the entire history of our planet. We should be celebrating America every single day for what we've achieved, not only for people here, but the aspiration that we have for people around the world. And we still were in a position, if we're going to be competitive to win the Cold War with China, we've got to get our economy sprinting. To do that, we've got to be a country where we can attract capital and where we can attract talent. And still, all the best and the brightest in the world, if they had a chance to come someplace, it would come here. But why would they come here? Because as the listener said here, the principles that we stand for, freedom and liberty. And we have to remember that. And the Republican Party's got to make sure too that we understand that we object to the overreach of the other side. We've got to make sure that we maintain our trust in the people, because we don't need a rule for every little thing. I mean, we've got to get it back to local control in school boards, library boards, and we're seeing a lot of great activism where people are getting engaged and running for these positions and in their communities, and that's what it takes. We've got to get parents involved. We've got to make sure that we've got choice for parents. All these things can happen at local level, but but again, with the 10th Amendment, that's not the president. The president of the United States has got things that he's got to focus on relative to the economy, relative to energy policy, and relative to national security, because you get those three things right, and that empowers every other aspect of what's going on in this country.
Excellent. Now, Social Security is currently on track to be insolvent by 2033, and that would mean a 23% cut in benefits for seniors. Congress has not acted. If they don't act, we're going to see this happen. As president, what would you do to ensure and protect Social Security?
Well, the first thing we have to do is we have to honor 100% the promise that we've made to the American people who've been paying into the system. We have to honor that. We owe them that. But, you know what I'm saying, but if we honor that promise, pretending like this cliff that's coming that you've described, that first time I've actually had someone bring this up, you know, in the entire time I've been campaigning, that we've got a thing that's going to happen, this 23% cut if you do nothing. Because people act like doing nothing is honoring the promise. To honor the promise, we have to do something. And whether that's, you know, let's take people that haven't been born yet. I mean, how about people that are under the age of 18? They've never paid in a dime. I mean, could we have a discussion about how things might have to change for them? Because if you're under 18 with all these advances I'm talking about, you're likely going to live to be 100.